Dr. Peter Lovatt, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Yes, I'm very good. Well, it's very nice to meet you. How are you?
Nice to meet you too.
I just wanted to say I really enjoyed looking at your photographs. So those photographs of artists in windows, it really does kind
Thank
of
you.
capture that essence of the isolation, but looking out and not
Yeah,
looking in, but looking out, and there's hope and optimism, but some despair and some hopelessness. There's a real mix of emotions in those images.
exactly. And also the symbolic thing for me is that, that window is a window for me into their world. I wouldn't have known all this. I didn't, I wanted to take 50 photographs just for fun, for myself as well, to uplift me. But in the end, by opening up these windows and opening up the world of musicians and artists, it gave me such a different perspective. And this is why I'm doing these talks, and why I would like to share these talks, is that everybody gets this opportunity to get this insight. And I mean, you were a dancer yourself, so you,
Yeah.
this is what inspired you from what I read,
Yes.
as well, to study.
Yes, it did. Yeah, absolutely.
So, but can I just ask you first, lockdown, you are in lockdown also now in the UK.
Yeah.
How did you experience the lockdown?
Well, the lockdown has been really, I don't know what one word would describe the lockdown, because there are so many different words to have described it. For me, it was a closing down of everything. When we went into lockdown in March 2020, I had a full diary of events booked right throughout the summer into the autumn. And that was my livelihood, and it was my work, and it's what I loved to do. It's what I knew how to do. And I had a tour planned, and my book was, so we locked down on middle of March, and my book was being released on the 2nd of April. And suddenly all the bookshops were closed, the book tour was cancelled, or the promotion was cancelled. Everything we'd been planning for months was cancelled. And so there was a sense of kind of despair and hopelessness. I'm thinking, oh my word, this is awful, awful in so many ways, professionally, financially, everything. The uncertainty was horrid. And my son, we have two sons, and our eldest son is a musician. And he was the same. All of his summer bookings were wiped out, and we were looking at one another saying, well, what for us now? And so we went through processes of trying to reimagine what life could be. And as you know, lots of my events were postponed from March, April, May, and they were originally postponed till September, October, November. So we had some hope that they might happen in those months. But then, of course, they were all eventually moved from September, October, November through to January, February of 2021. And then, of course, they were all cancelled. And so that was very hard. And so there was just a sense of uncertainty. And then, but then now this is personal. I mean, do you want me to talk personally, or?
You are free, if you don't mind, then.
Okay. Well, so I think for me, so the second extraordinary thing that happened for me was after all the work was cancelled, and I was at home for, like everybody else, for months and months and months. So the UK version of the book was meant to come out in April 2020, and then the US version of the book was due to come out in January 2021. And of course, it did come out in January 2021, but there was another pandemic, and we were closed down again. But the thing that happened with me is that I'd spent so much time traveling around the world that I didn't look after myself in any way. I just bounced from country to country, from continent to continent, on another airplane landing, another airplane landing. It was all over the place. And being locked down and sitting down and doing nothing, I started to notice things about my body that perhaps weren't quite right. They're little tiny things that I wasn't worried about. And things about my body, I thought, oh, they're changing because I'm on an airplane all the time, or they're changing some in different time zones. And I really didn't have the time or the inclination to think about them. And then just before Christmas, I went to the doctor to say, look, I'm worried about this. I don't know what it is. And then on the 11th of January this year, I was then diagnosed with bowel cancer. And
Oh, wow.
getting the diagnosis of bowel cancer was a shock. I mean, I was
Yeah.
just a huge shock. And then everything went really super quickly. Everything changed. And I was terrified because we were in the middle of a lockdown in the UK. Lots of the hospitals were specializing in COVID. There was talk that the cancer care wasn't happening. And I was terrified. I mean, absolutely personally terrified.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And then within 3 weeks, so I was diagnosed on the 11th of January, 2021. And I didn't know it at the time, but then 3 weeks later, I was then having surgery to remove the tumor and to remove a section of bowel and to take some lymph nodes out. And I was in hospital having the surgery. And before I went in for the surgery, there were two notable things. One was that the doctor said to me, when he first diagnosed me, he said, look, you need to be as fit and strong as possible for what you're about to go through. And he said, it's really important because it's a very physical bit of surgery you've got to have, and you need to be fit and strong mentally and physically for that. And the second thing, when I saw my surgeon, he went through and he called me in and he said, look, we need to operate on you next week. We have to do this next week. And he said, of course, there's a risk with COVID, but we need to get this thing out. And I said, okay. And he said, really, you have an option of not having the surgery, but if you don't have the surgery, then you'll be dead within months because the tumor is very large, it's very aggressive. And the interesting thing was, obviously that was terrifying and motivating, so it made me want to have the surgery very quickly. But of course, what it meant was, if we hadn't have had lockdown, and if I hadn't have stopped traveling around the world, I would have carried on ignoring the very minor symptoms that I had. I never experienced any pain at all of the symptoms. I would probably carried on being too busy working I wouldn't have wanted to sacrifice any work to suddenly stop and go to get medical advice. And I probably wouldn't have had the headspace to stop and think about these very small symptoms I had. And that would have meant that I wouldn't have survived. So for me, lockdown and COVID has had a real, well, there are just two sides of it. There's the catastrophic side of it, which has cancelled all of my work for the whole year, which has had huge financial implications and professional implications. And then there's the health side, which has really probably saved my life. So I have very mixed feelings about that. So
But
yeah,
that's incredible. It's incredible that you, that you noticed that in time and that you that everything happened. So I can completely understand your feeling about this. Yeah, but I think it's also I think this slowdown, this locked in idea really has brought us more focus to what we are doing. Like you say, it's been running around, not looking after yourself. And I think this brings things into perspective, not just in the COVID sense, but also, like you say now, health. How people eat, how they cook now, how they, doing physical exercise. And but how are you now? How are you feeling now?
oh well, it's just been over. It's been 4 weeks since I went into hospital. And so in that 4 weeks, I've had surgery and I've come back and I've been rehabilitating. So today is actually my first day back at work. So this is the first day I'm working today. So I'm very tired. But it's been interesting what you say about the sense of looking after ourselves and thinking about and refocusing. And in many ways, the arts give us this. The arts give us the opportunity when we stop trying to do all the other stuff to focus in on those really important things to do with ourselves. And so for me, what's got me through this process has been obviously the medical advice I've received and treatment. But when the doctor said to me that I needed to be as fit and strong as possible to deal with what I had to deal with, both physically and mentally, what I did in the time between him telling me that and now is to engage with movement, dance, and the arts as a way of trying to be as fit and healthy as possible, and to try to get my head in the right space. Because once you receive a diagnosis, and particularly when a doctor says it would have been fatal otherwise, then it messes with your head. It messes with mine anyway. And so being able to use lots of different styles of movement and the arts to help me with that. But of course, during lockdown, because there are no dance studios open and no gyms open, you have to find new ways of engaging with those activities that you can do at home. You know, both before the surgery and after the surgery, when I was having to be socially isolate.
Yeah, I saw some of your videos on Instagram, and it's amazing what you did and how creative you were. But I think this also comes from being an artist, from you know, thinking and finding a solution. And this is also what I find very interesting about the artists. What I've picked up in the time also is this problem solving skills that you have, and you know, getting around things and making plans and collaborate and finding new ways of doing it. And I think it comes, you will be more be able to tell us, or to tell me, but it has to do with the brain development.
Yeah, there's a certain, we get stuck in set patterns of thinking. So the human brain has changed to deal with patterns, and you know, we're very good. The human brain's brilliant at recognizing patterns, and our ways of thinking and perceiving and seeing are based on this learning, and we get this learned repertoire of things, and it constrains our thinking in many ways, which is useful. Because, for instance, if we were having a conversation and the line was dropping out and we missed every couple of words that we said, our brains would be fantastic at filling in the gaps, at working out what the other person probably said and what they probably meant, so that our brain can complete those patterns and can, you know, function in a broken down world, receiving imperfect signals. So that's what the brain is really good at doing. But the problem with that is that we can get stuck in set patterns of thinking. So we think in the same ways over and over and over again. And so it becomes really difficult for us to think creatively. Now, of course, what artists are fantastic at doing is thinking creatively and then applying that creativity in all kinds of unusual settings. So if anyone could deal with this lockdown and the pandemic, it will be artists, because they're the ones who are most used to breaking away from set patterns of thinking, set patterns of doing, set patterns of behaving, and then adapting somehow to that. Because of course our lives are not certain as artists in any way at all. Now, for me, I found, for instance, when I came out of hospital, that I was given a set of exercises to do by a physiotherapist. And these exercises for the first day or so were fine, but I had to do them for weeks. And they were so boring and so dull. Now, of course, one of the major problems we have in health is that dropout rates, you know, adherence rates to rehab schemes are really low. So people drop out of them all the time. So people start on these rehab schemes, and then they drop out of them because they get bored and they get fed up and they just don't want to do them. And so what I did with mine to stop me getting bored was I tried to mix them up. I tried to, you know, the three major exercise things they gave me. One was to go for a walk every day, you know, 3 or 4 times a day I had to walk. The second thing was to do some breathing exercises. And the third thing was to do some lower limb leg strengthening exercises. And after a couple of days, they were so dull to do. And so what I did, I used different forms of dance and forms of the arts to try to embellish those exercises, to make them more interesting, to stimulate myself cognitively while I was doing them, so that I would still do the exercise, but then add something on to make them more interesting. And I've been delighted, because through that, I've discovered all kinds of different ways of moving. And I've connected with people around the world who have given me hints and tips on how to move differently. And I found that really well, I found it a lovely experience actually to learn and to use all those different ways. And I think what's really difficult is when you get stuck in a set pattern of thinking, you have to change. Now, of course, having something that happens that's terrible, like a national lockdown or having a disease or having a diagnosis, you can do one of two things. You can either it's either fight or flight, I guess. You can either think, right, okay, I need to think differently now. My world has changed, so therefore I need to change the way I think to overcome this. Or you can keep thinking in exactly the same way, even though your world has changed. But of course, if you keep doing that, then you're simply going to crash. You're going to crash into the thing that is stopping you. You're not going to be able to work your way around it. And we know from the science that breaking away from set patterns of thinking can help you with what's called divergent thinking, and it can help you to be more creative. A movement can help you do that.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I also, this is what I definitely sensed and got from the artists that I photographed, also dancers that I photographed. Almost every time I thought to myself, these people have the skill now for this pandemic to get over it because of this. Also, this fact that they have this ability for endurance, for overcoming, for motivating themselves, for finding a new solution, like you are talking now. And yes, I totally agree with you. I think it's part of being an artist. I think for me, they are the best equipped for this pandemic.
Yeah, they're the best equipped, but they're the least well looked after, because of course many artists are in a worse situation in terms of their prospect and the future. Well, they simply don't know what the future looks like. If you're an accountant, you probably know, you've probably been on furlough. Your accountancy firm might still be running. It might be running in a slightly different way. But as an artist, if you're in a Broadway show or a West End show, or you belong to a ballet company, I'm very lucky to teach at the Royal Ballet School in London. And of course, the students, when they're graduating from there, typically will get contracts in their final year and they'll go and join a ballet company somewhere. And of course, many of them, the companies might not be recruiting, or they're not recruiting because the companies aren't performing. And so for these young people who've spent years and years and years training, and they're training to get to a certain point, or they've been working in the professional field as a dancer or as a musician, particularly dancers, they get to a certain point and then suddenly there's no work. So what do they do with their bodies? Do they keep training their bodies every day so that when theatre and dance reopens, their bodies are in peak condition so they can go and join a company or join a show? And then how do you do that indefinitely, never knowing when that show is? There are some dancers who've been in shows and they've now been out of the show for a year. They are slightly more mature dancers and they're thinking, will they ever get back in? Will their bodies be at the level where they'll be able to work when the theatres finally reopen, whether that's going to be in 6 months' time or a year's time? So this degree of uncertainty, and of course in the UK, I don't know what it's like in the rest of the world, but in the UK, artists are really not being supported financially. Individual artists, they're not on furlough. They're not being paid a percentage of what they're earning before. And so, of course, it becomes really difficult for them. For how long do they use their either their financial reserves or go into to deficit? It's really tough.
Yes, I agree with you that it's very tough, and it's in Vienna. I mean, there are support, and many artists, freelance artists, have support. But also it's this situation here at the MDV, the Music University, where the students, for example, also the same as at the ballet schools, they are at that year where they graduate, so they have to do auditions to start in a career. And those auditions didn't happen this last year because of lockdown. And many of them were at that also, studying for many years, and then came to that point where it's graduation. First of all, there couldn't be audiences at the graduation performances. And then, of course, this, what is the next step? Where am I going to? What am I doing? And they can't get financial support because they haven't been freelance artists for a year to prove anything or to prove any income. So this is the situation, or many artists that just went freelance 2 months before lockdown, you know, there's no income. So this is a totally, I agree with you. And also I'm glad you mentioned about the ballet dancers, the bodies, because what I think people don't understand is that the body, they are used to moving in a studio. So you cannot in a living room, even if you do a Zoom ballet class, bar class, or whatever, there's no way you can do the same exercise, use the same muscles in a kitchen or in a living room.
Yeah.
So 100%, but I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because that's just, I've also spoken to choreographers and ballet dancers, and they say the same thing, you know, and also that motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also generally having class. I mean, in a ballet studio where you've got a ballet teacher giving you corrections, they look at your body in a 360 degrees, they can see the different parts of the body moving, and they can give you very precise corrections. But of course on Zoom, you're in a fixed position. Suddenly you can't get a camera looking around your body in different ways. So the whole training environment is really different. And yes, it's worrying. And of course, the major difference between dancers and musicians is that, because my son, as I said, is a musician, if as a musician you miss a year or you miss 2 years or you miss 5 years, you can keep practicing and then you can carry on playing. Of course, and the same with actors. But for a dancer, they're time limited. You know, that period of time after they've graduated, where they perform professionally as a you know, working professional, is really limited and short. And every year you miss out on that, it's a big chunk. And of course, the probability of getting through to your late 30s is quite low anyway. So you know, most of the people are getting work in their early 20s or late teens. But of course, if you're missing out on that body of work in your late teens, early 20s, then it's going to be much harder for you to pick it up later in life. So of course, there's some agonizing decisions to be made for dancers. And of course, because they simply don't know what the future holds at the moment, that simply compounds the uncertainty of working in the arts. And of course, the other big thing is we've spent years trying to equalize the arts in terms of, you know, who is allowed to perform in the arts? Is it just the wealthy people, or is it people who come from lower socioeconomic status groups, so people who don't have lots of family money? And of course, the more uncertainty it is, then it's simply those people without an independent income who simply won't be able to afford to stay in it. And of course, that skews who's allowed to perform in the arts, which is terrible. I mean, absolutely an awful thing. So, and this is why in some cases in the UK where those independent artists are not getting financial support, it's going to hit those people who can least afford it the most, which is a real tragedy for the arts.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And also I know, because we lived in the UK, my children trained at the Royal Ballet School as well. And I know this, you know, the financial sacrifice for the parents, even to have the children there. And then also afterwards, you know, for them to start somewhere, because it's not that they have to move somewhere to a different country. This is also something that a topic that I wanted to raise, and that is that, you know, many artists are not with their families. They don't have that privilege to live in the same country or the same town. So you have your son with you. I live where my children live, but you know, there are many dancers here whose parents live somewhere else. They come here because they have these contracts. And you know, one night I was standing backstage watching my two children dance, and one of the dancers came to me and said, "Oh, I wish my mama was here." You know, and I just think, well, I don't think about it that way, but I probably, you know, that he saw me watching and that he had this this feeling that he would have loved his mum to be there. And these are little things, but these are things that I think when people talk about the arts, they go to a ballet and they watch the dancers, and everything looks so effortlessly, and the costumes look so glamorously, and the whole setting, and it's all that. But behind the scenes, there are so much going on, and the training, as you say, you know, at the Royal Ballet School, they come at the age of 11. You know, they don't have that childhood. They work so hard at such a young age, and this is part. I think this is part of the artists that we should see and recognize, not just the 3 hours that we watch them on the stage. And I think government should also acknowledge that, that these artists don't give us 50%, they give us 100% of what they can, what they are able to give. Yet they receive, if we talk financially, they don't receive what they are worth, and not just financially. I think the credit they should receive, you know, is also not there.
Yeah. Well, we need to value, I mean, we need to value dance more in society than we do. Dance is a fundamental part of being human, and the training that's required to become a professional dancer is immense. And as you say, the sacrifices that people have to make for that are, you know, there's very few other environments where somebody would leave their home and their family, travel halfway around the world, and be in that kind of isolation away from their family, and with the probability, without huge reward. If there was the opportunity, like if you're a tennis player, you go to a tennis camp or a football camp, yeah, one day you might earn millions and millions of pounds, or you might have this huge fame that will bring you fame and fortune for the rest of your life. And that's not the case for a dancer at all. And you know, but they do it because it's part of who they are. I mean, so yeah, it's tough. It's really tough.
But this is my question is that, or my thought process about what I was telling you about is that it should start with education. It should start in the schools, because I think that our schools are outdated in the sense that the system, the curriculum is based still from the time that we had the Industrial Revolution, where maths and sciences were the important subjects and arts were not, and arts were seen as entertainment, or it didn't have that value. And now, like you, for example, have done research on the effects of dancing on the brain. There are so much now available scientific evidence on music, on dancing, on the brain, and on the psychological effects on people. Why don't we put this subject alongside maths and science, because it's so interlinked?
Well, I think you're right. Now, the evidence shows us, you know, we have this weird system of education where we think we should get people to sit still and not fidget and not move their bodies while they're learning, just in case all the clever stuff falls out of their heads. It's crazy. But we think people's best way of learning is by sitting still. And we know that's not the case. We know that when we introduce movement into the learning environment, then people learn. And they engage differently, they connect with other people differently, they think differently, and it helps them to learn in all sorts of different ways. So there is some research happening, well, in Australia and in America, where people are introducing movement into things like English classes or maths classes or physics classes. And when you introduce the movement as part of that, then of course people engage with the material differently and they learn differently, which is fantastic. Now, I'm not talking about learning styles at all. This isn't about those fictitious learning styles. This is about the research evidence where people inside schools are changing the way that people engage with the material to help them learn. And it's really been really positive. Now, I think part of the thing is, you said earlier on that when we look at dance and the arts, we see them as some sort of recreational playtime, as if that is secondary and not important. And even now we have the STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering, and maths, which is thought to be this at the top of the hierarchy of what we're trying to learn. And of course, the arts are still in many ways below the science, technology, engineering, and maths, so they're lower of importance. And then even within the arts, dance and movement is seen as the lowest of those art forms. So we might have music at the top, visual arts, painting. Now, many schools have an art block where people do painting, and many schools have a music block where people do music. Very few schools have a dance block where people go and dance. You know, talking about regular schools, it's not seen as the most important aspect of the learning. But what the science tells us is that when we move our body, it changes things fundamentally, and it changes things in 4 ways. First of all, when we move together, it changes our relationships with other people. It changes our social interaction with other people in positive ways. Now, of course, societies are all about social interaction and social bonding. So that social element should be so, so important, and we should be prioritizing that. The second thing that movement does, it changes the way that we think. It changes our thinking, it changes our problem solving, it changes how we approach issues and problems, and it helps us find solutions in different ways. So moving the body changes the way that we think. And we should be really on top of that, thinking, well, of course, learning is about thinking, isn't it? And if we want to change that learning and thinking, then moving our body as part of that will play a big role. The third element is that the emotions. We know that when we move our body, it changes us emotionally. Now, the emotions are really important. That whole connection between emotion and motion are tightly linked. We know that we communicate our emotions through our moving bodies, but not only us individually communicating that, then other people, when they look at us, they perceive our emotions through our movements. So there's a communication going on there. We also know that when we move our body, it can help us to get rid of pent-up emotions. You know, in many of our societies, we're so closed in emotionally. We're not really allowed to show our emotions. Of course, when you look at a 6-year-old running around, they run around in an excited way and they show their emotions. And when you look at a dog, the dog will be wagging its tail, showing its emotion. It's not afraid. But we don't do that. We don't wag our tails and we don't run around excitedly because we reserve our emotions. We hold them in. Of course, moving can help us express that. We also know that there's been lots of studies which have found that when we move our bodies and when we dance, it can reduce our anxiety and it can reduce our depression levels. And there have been all kinds of clinical trials on this. Now, of course, certainly in the UK, we're in the middle of a really serious problem with anxiety and depression, particularly amongst our younger people. And of course, movement and physical activity and dance are ways to reduce anxiety and depression. So of course, the emotions are the third thing. And then the fourth element is our physical makeup. We know that when we move our body, it changes us physically. Now, that's not just changing our heart rate, which we know it does, but it also changes the way that our brain works. It changes our hormones. It changes all kinds of our muscles and our everything. It changes all things to do with our physical makeup, our brain, our heart, our muscles, our hormones. And so when we move and when we dance, it changes those four things: our social, our thinking, our emotions, and our physical. Those are so fundamental. And that's why we should be incorporating movement as part of not only in education, but also in the workplace as well, so that we get people moving, because it has all of those amazing benefits.
I 100% agree. I'm so glad of all this information, because this is what I think we don't realize. I think it's like you say, you think maths, then we suddenly think, oh wow, this person is a mathematician. And not that I say it's not good, but what I'm saying is, look at just what you mentioned now, what dance is what movement is doing for us. I mean, you really can't get anything even comparative to that. If I can talk from a personal level, my daughter who has Asperger's, she used to do ballet and tap and jazz and in Windsor at Heidi Rhodes School of Dancing, a lovely teacher. And she was really happy and you know, even though she wouldn't become a dancer, we all knew she wouldn't become a ballet dancer, but she did it. And for her, and it was so lovely and such a lovely experience. And also that with other children together and so on. And later, as she stopped doing it, her anxiety levels because of the Asperger syndrome that comes with it, and depression, that she had to be on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications. And you know, I think really so many times people are given these substances, that these medications, just as a rule of thumb, you know, or almost as I'm depressed, so this is an antidepressant, instead of, like you say now, what movement can do for the brain. Isn't that also then something to explore, you know, to educate children, sorry, from a young age, that they would revert to that before anything else?
Well, I can't speak about medication. I certainly wouldn't suggest stopping medication in any way at all, because if a medical doctor has prescribed medication, that's really important. What I would suggest is that people move as well. And so the movement comes on top of whatever other treatments are happening, then the dancing and movement could go alongside that as well. And when that becomes part of that total package, then research has shown that it does reduce mild to moderate depression and anxiety. And we've seen this in all kinds of ways. It's been shown in clinical settings in hospitals where people have been admitted for depression and anxiety. So they're clinically diagnosed, but also in environments where people, for instance, in schools, so people who are at school dealing with mild to moderate depression, then dance has been shown to have a positive impact on that. And even in studies looking at people with Parkinson's, we know that Parkinson's disease, typically older people, and people with Parkinson's report having higher levels of depression than aged matched controls. And we've seen in those people that when they engage in dance, then their depression levels come down, their anxiety levels come down, their feelings of fatigue come down. There's a whole range of things that happen. So yeah, I think if we were to, you know, this is why one of the things with lockdown, which has been so terrible, in addition to having a 22-year-old son, I have a 7-year-old son as well. And our 7-year-old is going through the homeschooling situation. Now, normally at the school he goes to, they do a lot of physical activity at the school. So when he's actually in school, they do lots of physical activity for which they get changed into different, you know, things for sports or whatever the activity is. They do a lot of time spending outside, being in the woods, and they do a whole range of things that complement their in-class learning and their the sport and physical activity. And of course, since we've been doing home learning, he's having Zoom lessons with the school every day, but it's only the face-to-face on Zoom. You know, they don't do any of the physical activity. And then, of course, when you've got a 7-year-old sat in front of a computer screen for 5.5 hours a day, you know, having lessons in English and maths and reasoning and French, then of course, they're missing out on all those physical activities. And I look at him and I see him after a few hours fidgeting and moving around. And so on Friday afternoon, we played hooky. He went out with his older brother and he went to the park, because I just couldn't bear to see him spend any more time just sat in front of him. So he missed the last 3 hours of school on Friday afternoon. It was such a lovely day here. He went out to the park and he ran around the park with his brother and had a great time. But I think that's really important. We need to balance those two things together, the learning with the physical activity. And if we forget the physical activity, then of course we will see an increase in anxiety and depression. And as soon as you have all that pressure to say, right, you know, it's really important, you learn even more content, you've got to learn more stuff. And we forget about key things, and then of course we then become unwell. So I think we need a balanced approach we need preventative movement. We need movement to prevent us from getting ill. And then if we get ill, we need movement to help us get better. But we mustn't forget the preventative stuff we have to do, because that's really important. We don't want to get ill.
Yeah, and what also interesting is that you have already, because you know the importance of movement, the moment you had to do your rehab, your brain has immediately thought of different movements, because you are conscious of it. And I'm thinking that if we teach children if art is a subject alongside these other subjects, and dancing, for example, and I'm talking now from a young age, and especially in the UK, where the children go to school at a really young age, that we show the importance of the arts, that they start learning about the bodies as well, because I think dancers are, and that's probably why you also realize something is wrong, because dancers, I think, are very conscious about their bodies. I think they are really in tune with their bodies, and it comes with this fact that they are trained to see and to realize what the bodies are capable of. So this is really.
I absolutely agree. I think we should, the arts and movement should play a central role in children's learning, and they should be as important as English and maths, reading and writing. They're not secondary at all. And we have to change as a society the way that we perceive movement and the arts. It needs to be everything needs to be much more open as part of that society, and as seen as an integral part of the fabric of the society. So we have a culture change that goes ahead. But the problem we have is educating people on the value of the arts, beyond performing on the stage at the Royal Opera House, or beyond having a painting being exhibited at the Royal Academy, or beyond having a #1 piece of music. And there was something you said earlier on, which I just want to take a slight, just like not to correct, but just to pick you up on. When your daughter who has some Asperger's was dancing, you said, we knew she was never going to be a dancer. And I kind of went, because she is a dancer. We are all dancers.
But what I mean professionally,
exactly. Well, that shouldn't be the primary. This shouldn't be the primary. Everyone should be a dancer, is a singer, is an artist, is a painter, is a lover, is an expressionist. Everyone. We are all those things. Some of us will do it to a certain level where somebody will put us on a stage and pay us to be on that stage. But that's only one person, right? There's one Darcy Bussell. There's one, Stephen McRae. There's one of those people, but there's millions of people behind who are dancers. And one of the things that I find is that people say to me, I can't dance. I can't dance, or I can't dance anymore. I used to dance when I was a child, but I can't dance anymore because I'm no longer a child. And they seem to think that dance you have to belong to a certain category. You have to have a certain body shape, or a certain body size, or a certain age, or a certain flexibility, or a certain sexuality. You need to have these certain characteristics to dance, and it's wrong on every level. And we are all dancers, and we are all painters, and we're all musicians. And this is, once we recognize that at a societal level, and we stop stopping people doing it because they're not going to perform at the Royal Opera House, then I think the better. And that's what I love to see. When I see people coming to dance, when I see older people with things like Parkinson's coming to dance, these aren't dancers, but when they move their body, not only does it has these huge benefits for people, to their mind and to their emotions and their thinking and their social interaction, but they all look so beautiful. Suddenly they are beautiful, moving bodies. Moving bodies are beautiful. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could take away some of the inhibition about moving our bodies, so that people didn't feel quite so self-conscious about doing it?
Anyway, you're totally right. No, you're totally right about that. And it's also the same in music. You know, I feel we don't sing enough, and we don't sing to our children anymore, and our children don't sing as much as we used to sing. You know, but it seems to all gradually. It's a gradual thing that happened, that it became less and less and less, and it's probably about the dancing as well, because it's also schools are very academically focused. So of course this is why children also have to sit for such long times, you know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's funny because there's something about you know, we should all be singing more and dancing more and moving more and playing more, you know, allowing them throughout life, doing all of those activities. And as soon as we judge things and we give them scores, and we get used in popular culture to, you know, telling people they're not very good at something, or giving people a score, I'm slightly worried about hip hop dance going into the next round of Olympics. Now, suddenly hip hop dancing is going to be judged, and people are going to be given scores on that judgment. So some people are going to be good at it, some people are going to be bad at it, some are going to qualify, and some people won't qualify. And I think in some ways that takes away some of the spirit of the dance that has developed, you know, over years and years and years, of this joyful expression of communicating with one another, of social bonding and feeling of belonging to a certain group. And I have a sense of identity through movement. All those things are wonderful things, but once we judge it and tell people they're not very good at it, then of course it stops people from engaging in it. And I think that's not good.
Yeah. Can I just quickly ask you, was there something you did during lockdown, something that you've never had the time to do? A hobby, or a cooking or baking, or
Tai Chi.
okay.
I had never done Tai Chi before, and I started to practice Tai Chi, which I've really enjoyed. You know, that's something that's come out of lockdown. Yeah, and it's calmed my mind.
Good. Peter, and just one last thing, what is your wish for when this is all over?
Oh, I just wish that artists can have the opportunity to do what they love and what they've been training for. So I hope, I wish those opportunities are there for every artist to practice their art. Good.
Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing all this with us, and with me, and with and also all this information about dance. That's really what I appreciate a lot, and for your time to talk to me.
Well, Petra, it's really nice to meet you. Thank you.
All the best, and I hope you get well soon, and yeah, I wish you best health.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Bye.
Bye-bye.